Welcome to The Explainer. While we're all busy admiring those sleek new electric cars passing us by on the street, there's a massive, hidden world operating right parallel to our daily commutes. A world of delivery logistics that fundamentally shapes the air we breathe and the traffic we sit in. So today, we are decoding the complex, high-stakes ecosystem of urban freight and exploring exactly what it's going to take to achieve zero-emission delivery.
But to really grasp why delivery logistics is our next massive frontier, we've got to look at the consumer market first. Close to 30% of cars sold globally this year, they're set to be electric. Think about that for a second. 30%. The consumer EV tipping point hasn't just approached, it's officially here, driven by everyday people responding to energy crises and some seriously fast-moving technology.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just look at the crazy tech hitting the market right now. The BYD Denza Z9 GT launching in Europe is a luxury EV with up to 643 miles of range, using a massive 1,500 kilowatt flash charging system. That means it can jump from 10% to 70% battery in just 5 minutes. Literally faster than brewing a cup of coffee. But these flagship specs, they're really just the tip of the iceberg, because this is exactly the kind of tech that's bleeding over into the commercial vans dropping packages at our doors.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be looking at the EV tipping point, the hidden last mile, the three-legged stool, electrifying the delivery fleet, smart charge management, and finally, the road ahead.
All right, part 1, the EV tipping point, consumers versus commercial.
Moving on to part 2, the hidden last mile, mapping the journey.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're up against. Commercial trucks make up less than 4% of vehicles on global roads, but they crank out over a quarter of all road transport emissions. It's wild. And thanks to explosive e-commerce growth, freight emissions have just skyrocketed. You really can't fix a supply chain if you don't know exactly how it operates. A package travels through the first mile from a port or manufacturer to a regional warehouse. Then the middle mile takes it to smaller local distribution centers. And finally, we hit the last mile, the final move straight to the consumer. Remarkably, right here, in this last mile, is where an estimated half of all road-based freight emissions actually happen.
But hold on, we need to zoom in even further. We've got to talk about the last 50 feet. This is that absolute final stretch, literally from the parked delivery vehicle to your front doorstep or an office suite. Why is this absolutely crucial? Well, research from the Urban Freight Lab found that a staggering 80% of a delivery driver's time is actually spent parked at the curb, completing this final 50 feet on foot. It is the most congested, bottlenecked, time-consuming part of the whole operation.
Which brings us to Section 3, the three-legged stool, the framework for zero-emission delivery.
So what's the actual fix here? Well, the Urban Freight Lab designed an academic framework for zero-emission delivery, or ZED, to clean up this massive logistical puzzle. It boils down to 3 vital interconnected pieces: electrification, mode shift, and space management. It's literally like a 3-legged stool. If you knock out even one of those legs, the entire transition to sustainable urban delivery just collapses. Let's break these down to see how they practically apply to our cities.
All right, Section 4, electrifying the delivery fleet, policies and real-world action.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how major companies are tackling a huge chicken and egg problem. See, delivery companies hesitate to buy big electric trucks if there's nowhere to charge them, right? But nobody wants to build massive charging depots if there are no trucks on the road to use them. Thankfully, huge household brands are forcing a breakthrough. Look at PepsiCo. They're already running Tesla semis at their California facilities as part of a big push to hit net zero emissions by 2040. And Amazon? They've deployed over 20,000 Rivian electric delivery vans across the US, aiming for a staggering 100,000 by 2030, and they're doing it by buying the vans and building the private depot charging to match.
But here's the thing. Private depots alone won't cut it. To support this massive shift, U.S. public EV charging infrastructure is scaling up incredibly fast, with over 200,000 ports available nationwide as of late 2024. And this is so essential, because actually, over 90% of U.S. trucking companies are just owner-operators or tiny fleets. These independent gig drivers can't exactly drop millions on a private charging depot, so they rely entirely on robust public networks.
And then you have these incredibly cool startups like SparkCharge, totally bypassing the usual gridlock. They're offering charging as a service. Basically, instead of a delivery fleet waiting around, sometimes for months or even years, just to get the utility permits to upgrade their local power grid, these companies bring mobile on-demand charging directly to the fleet yards. It's charging on wheels. It dramatically slashes both the upfront capital costs and the timeline required to transition to an electric fleet.
And cities themselves are getting in on the action to push the market forward. In the US, federal law kind of ties cities' hands. They can't just outright ban gas trucks based on fuel type, but they can get creative with localized tools, like New York City's congestion relief zone. By charging different tolls for vehicles entering dense urban areas, with commercial trucks paying a heavier premium, cities can financially incentivize carriers to combine trips, operate way more efficiently, and ultimately shift to cleaner fleets to offset those operational costs.
Okay, Section 5. Smart Charge Management, the brains behind the grid.
So the crucial point is, what happens when millions of these delivery vehicles actually plug in all at once? If every single delivery van plugs in right at 5 p.m. when routes end, the local power grids would completely melt down and electricity costs would absolutely skyrocket. That's unmanaged charging, the old chaotic way. You plug in, draw maximum power immediately, and get hit with crazy peak time electricity rates and massive grid upgrade bills. Smart Charge Management, or SCM, is the genius alternative. It acts like a dynamic brain, talking between the vehicles, the chargers, and the grid. It actively schedules the charging for cheaper off-peak hours, enforces power ceilings, and makes sure every single van is perfectly charged by its next shift without frying the local transformer.
And this leads us to an absolutely fascinating concept: bidirectional charging. Thanks to SCM, a fleet of parked electric delivery trucks isn't just sucking power from the grid anymore. It literally becomes a massive mobile energy storage unit. During times of extreme grid strain or peak building load, these vehicles can actually push power back into the connected facility. This helps lower the building's peak demand charges on their monthly bill, and it can even keep the lights on during an extreme weather event. It's a real game changer.
And finally, Section 6, the road ahead, mode shift and space.
As we established earlier with our three-legged stool analogy, just swapping a gas fan for an electric one doesn't actually fix urban gridlock, right? If we want truly sustainable cities, we've got to lean on those other two legs. First up, mode shift. This means pivoting to micro-freight, think e-cargo bikes zipping through dense straits, or even delivery drones. To support this, cities like New York are actually piloting public battery swapping stations for gig workers, making everything safer and more convenient. And on the space management side, the private sector is getting super creative, repurposing vacant retail spaces into logistics micro-hubs. At the same time, local governments are rethinking that highly contested curb space, carving out dedicated loading zones exclusively for zero-emission vehicles.
So, there you have it. We've decoded this massive, complex machine working behind the scenes of urban freight. Getting to zero-emission delivery takes amazing tech, smart policy, clever space management, and a whole lot of capital. But, it also involves you. Next time you click Buy Now, ask yourself, how will your expectations for lightning-fast delivery shape the air you breathe and the streets you walk? It's a system we are all a part of, and understanding how it works is the very first step toward improving it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.